Before I get started talking about this book, I want to very, very quickly remind everyone that I have a Patreon. And I do as much as I can for my patrons by providing them with lots and lots of fun benefits and making sure that the money that they spend supporting my channel and supporting me as a person is appreciated. I make so many YouTube videos, I love making them, but this is not a hobby, this is part of my job. And if my patrons disappeared tomorrow, so would my channel. So if you subscribe to this channel, if you love what I do, and you have a few dollars that you can spare each month, I would really appreciate your support on Patreon. You'll get a lot of benefits, and you'll get to join a really, really fun intersectional community of bookworms. And you'll be supporting me. Okay, now on with the video. I'm going to make the bold claim that This Is How You Lose the Time War by Amal El-Mohtar and Max Gladstone is a perfect novel. Calling something perfect can mean different things to different people. But I distinctly remember when I was at university, I would talk to friends a lot about perfect music. I've always been a big music fan, and I was going through my collection one day and looking at what I would consider to be a perfect album. And it didn't matter what the genre was, or how old the album was, or who made it. The way I was defining a perfect album was one where it was very difficult, if impossible, to criticize anything about the record. The length of it was suitable for its genre. It was mixed and mastered really nicely. The song structure and order was really good. Every track was the kind that you wanted to listen to, that you had no intention of skipping. And I kind of compiled a list at the time of albums that I really enjoyed that I considered to be perfect, where not a single song was a dud. I could listen to it again and again, and everything about it just kind of ticked the right boxes. The album didn't even have to be a masterpiece that pushed a genre forward or anything like that. It just had to be perfect in its execution. And I think that this is the kind of novel that does exactly the same thing, but for literature rather than music. This Is How You Lose the Time War is perfect. I got my ring stuck in my jumper. But why is it perfect? Well, to start with, it's a science fiction novel that's really short. It clocks in at 200 pages. And that's quite a bold thing to do with science fiction. A lot of sci-fi these days is pretty hefty, and you can pick up a sci-fi book that looks more like a fantasy book. That works for big space operas, but also it doesn't have to be that, because this is also kind of a space opera. It certainly has that feel to it. And I think 200 pages, that brevity works in its favour. Then you've got the fact that this is a novel that is at once pretty complicated and wonderfully simple. On its surface, it has an incredibly dense amount of world building, as so much science fiction does. But at its core, when you strip everything back, it's just a love story. And a story whose themes are about how love conquers everything. Love ultimately wins out, no matter how complex your society, no matter how far into the future we go, no matter what your circumstances, no matter whether or not you're even human anymore, none of that really matters, because love is still there and love wins. And I find the blend of complex world building and very, very simple themes so enticing, and it creates something that is perfect. But before I go any further, I should probably tell you what it's about. This Is How You Lose the Time War is set presumably very, very far into the future. You have two warring factions who are attempting to control time itself. We don't know how long they've been at war for, and we don't really know what they're after. We can just assume that they want to control time, because they ironically spend all their time journeying back and forth through multiple different timelines, multiple different possible pasts and futures, to try to write and rewrite history in a specific way that suits them. And working for one of those factions is a character who's just called Red. At the beginning of the novel, Red is described as a sort of mechanical humanoid thing that can do anything. She's roaming a battlefield, and she's the only living thing left. She's on a planet somewhere where an enormous war has taken place. Very sci-fi, very futuristic, mechs and armor and battle suits and all cool shit is littered everywhere, and she's just looking around at what's happened. The fact that there were two warring armies that wiped each other out, and that was all according to plan. She, as an agent for her faction, wanted this outcome. And so now she's walking around the battlefield, job done. But then she finds a letter. The letter is written in fire. It burns in front of her, and she can only read it once. And cleverly, the letter has the opening line, burn before reading. When she reads it, the letter comes from an opposing agent from the other faction who is simply called Blue. Blue has been observing Red. Blue is becoming disenchanted by this ongoing time war. And she spends the letter teasing and taunting and flirting with Red. That's kind of how their relationship begins. The two of them send each other letters back and forth, taunting each other, while also admitting certain feelings about the war itself and the factions that they work for. They're both incredibly talented agents, the best at what they do. They've caused countless deaths, they've changed history time and time again, as if it doesn't matter at all. And the novel is separated between their two perspectives, but also between regular, descriptive, prosic's not a word, prosy chapters, and epistolary chapters in the form of letters between the two. So you'll have a short Red chapter that describes what Red is up to. Then you'll get a letter from Blue. Then you get a short Blue chapter that describes what Blue is up to, and then a letter from Red. And it repeats in that cycle of Red chapter, Blue chapter, Red letter, over and over again until the book ends. This lovely rhythm that's literally in like 4/4 time works so perfectly, especially considering the chapters are short and the novel overall is short, so everything is so beautifully contained. It never gets away from itself. I also want to mention here, while I think about it, I don't know how this novel was divided in terms of writing duty between its two authors. I've read a few things that were either co-written or co-translated, and there's always different ways of doing it. For example, the novels of Mieko Kawakami are translated by a team of two men, Sam Bett and David Boyd. And from what I understand, one of them handles all of the prose, while the other handles the dialogue. Fun way of doing it. I'm wondering if these two authors, Amal El-Mohtar and Max Gladstone, maybe plotted out the whole thing and then each of them was acting as Red and acting as Blue. Because they have very, very distinct personalities. Blue is a little bit more arrogant and cocksure, while Red is a little bit more reserved, shy, and nervous, especially when it comes to their letters. And the letters themselves change as the novel goes on, from flirtatious to out-and-out declarations of love, written in this gorgeous, over-the-top, hyperbolic Shakespearean way. Poetic declarations of love and adoration, the kinds of things that would make you blush. They are absurdly over-the-top declarations. And I don't use the phrase over-the-top very often, if ever, because it doesn't really mean anything. It's a phrase that's kind of insubstantial, but I can't help but use it here because within the context of this novel, these letters are almost absurd in just how much they are expressing passion and love. It's weird. And I think that that adds to how perfect the novel is, because this wonderful comparison between grounded, imaginative world building and simplistic, as I said, Shakespearean declarations of love, it's wonderful, it's juicy, it's addictive. That weird juxtaposition between those two things was a risk to try to execute, and it worked so well. Although it's short and the world building is complex and leaves a lot to the imagination, the novel treads a lot of ground. It's a novel where the authors understand they are writing about time itself. So what can they do with that? The protagonists are presumably immortal. They can live forever because they spend a lot of time in Earth's history, married to famous politicians, playing roles in disguise in order to twist and turn the cogs of time in order to make certain things happen that they need to happen. So one of them might spend 10 years in Shakespeare's London or in Julius Caesar's court. In their letters, they reference historic figures that they've both met and wonder if they met them in the same timelines because they affect different timelines. So one might say, yes, I know Plato, I'm sure you met Plato, was my Plato the same as yours? And then we fling ourselves into the future, into a Star Wars-esque intergalactic war on some distant planet full of mechs and robots. It's a novel that's having fun with its world building, a novel that understands that when you have a scope as freeing as something that explores time and space, as far back and as far future as you like, you need to run with it. You need to really be creative. It kind of reminds me of when I used to read lots of Green Lantern comics, and there was always a joke that the Green Lantern can create anything he wants based on his imagination. He can create any physical structure, and way too often in those comics, he makes a big green fist and just punches people with it. That's dreadful. And the best Green Lantern writers have come up with really fun things to create. One of the Green Lanterns was an architect, and so the things he can design just off the top of his head are wild. And that brings me back to this. If you're going to create a world that explores multiple realities, multiple areas of history and time and futures, go big, go weird. Like the film Everything Everywhere All at Once. That film went, okay, multiverse. What insane stuff can we come up with? Let's actually do it, and let's do it well. And this book does that. But then we draw ourselves back to that core where everything is about love. This is a romance. This is a love story between two people of opposing houses. A Romeo and Juliet story of love flying in the face of politics, of war, of opposition, of presumably enormous stakes. These two people who are opposing agents, the best of the best, are falling in love through letters that they keep sending each other. And now that their love is real, once that love becomes apparent and they understand themselves and each other, there's not really any turning back. Once you fall in love, there's only one way to go, and that's forward. And in a book that's about time, about reaching back and reaching across through different realities, moving forward blindly and without any kind of plan is in direct opposition to everything that they stand for, professionally and politically. Brilliantly clever. And all of this is explored so elegantly across 200 pages, where half of the novel's runtime is just declarations of love. It's so beautiful. There's not a single thing wrong with this book. Everything it does is right. Every choice that the author's made works. That's what makes it perfect. This is a perfect science fiction novel. It's a perfect romance, a perfect love story. There's not a single thing that you could criticize here. That's what I'm so amazed by. Every single choice in this novel is perfect. From its beginning to its ending, through its execution, through its editing, through its length, through its dialogue, through its mix of traditional prose and epistolary letters, from its massive, massive world-building concepts and very, very simple themes of love and romance and addiction to one another. It's perfect. This is a perfect novel. Check it out and subscribe for books.